Without further ado, my presentation as previously introduced, framing Dazai Osamu, translator, invisibility, publishing dynamics, and the shaping of a literary legacy. And this is the overview. So nowadays, outside Japan, one name continues to resonate alongside contemporary figures like Murakami Haruki and leading women writers, and that name is Dazai Osamu. Anybody here familiar with Dazai? Show of hand, please. Okay, that's good. Everybody, have you read Dazai? Okay, that's good. So I don't need to introduce Dazai. But after World War II, Dazai was among the very first Japanese authors to be translated into both English and Arabic. More than 75 years after his death, his writing keeps crossing linguistic borders, with major titles now available in more than 20 languages, continuing to attract new readers around the world. And such example of that is No Longer Human Ningen Shikaku. In recent years, Dazai has become a truly transnational figure whose writings continue to move across languages, generations, and media. Once regarded primarily as a modern literary icon, he now occupies a broader cultural sphere. His reimagining in the manga and anime series Bungo Stray Dogs has introduced him to younger audiences worldwide. While online communities such as BookTok have revived global interest in his works, prompting new translations and reprints. On the right, you can see this is the Barnes novel BookTok section. You can see here, novel or human. So while popular culture has played a significant role in renewing Dazai's global visibility, translation remains the primary conduit through which his works reach international readers. Translators act not only as linguistics intermediaries, but as creative agents who shape tone, voice, and reader perception, and also engagement. Building on this, my presentation today examines how translation and publishing practices shape Dazai Osamu's global image to reveal how differing degrees of translator invisibility, both in English and Arabic, context influence his reception. And when it comes to publishing or publishers, I'm not going to be talking about that as much. But by comparing these dynamics between Arabic and English, this presentation will also try to show how translation functions as a performative act that frames and continually redefines Dazai's literary legacy across cultures. And I'll explain a little bit more about the performative part. So Dazai was the first Japanese author to be translated into English after World War II, and this is what I think. So please, if you know other information, let me know. Because I think Osaragi Jiro's Homecoming was 1955, and it's, I think, the first book-length translation, but the first Japanese work to be translated into English was two short stories by Dazai, was translated by Side Sticker in 1953 in the English magazine Encounter. Since then, over 70 titles by Dazai have appeared in English, some with 3 or even 4 different versions. This graph here traces the trajectory of English translations from 1950s to the present. And when I say to the present, it's actually till next year. So 1950s, early introductions by Side Sticker and Keene. 1980s, a surge with translators such as James O'Brien, Felice Lands, and Ralph McCarthy, supported by publishers such as Kodanja and Taro. And both James O'Brien and Felice Lands, they wrote their dissertations on Dazai first, and then they started translating him after. After a quiet period in the 1990s and 2000s, translation activity rose again in the 2010s and 2020s, coinciding with the renewed interest brought by Bungo Stray Dogs and Dazai's presence in digital culture. In the 2020s, Dazai have become something of a viral literary figure, and we see a wave of new translations and republications. For example, Sam Bett's Flowers of Buffoonery, which actually is considered a prequel of No Longer Human and was published originally in 1935. And then the third English translation of No Longer Human by Juliet Winters Carpenter. And the it's a third translation collection by James O'Brien, and then Sam Bett's The Beggar Student, and Rolf McCarthy's fourth um, translation collection, No One Knows. So in 2020s, so I already, yes. So now we've looked into how Dazai's translation have evolved, especially the surge in the 2020s. I want to pause here a little bit to explain how I approach translator visibility. So in recent translation studies, translator visibility is viewed not as a static state, but as something translators do, something they actively perform. For example, Peter Freeth describes this as the performance of translatorship. He shows how translators construct visibility through paratexts, interviews, and social media, effectively performing their professional identity. Heidi Coates expands on this idea, framing visibility as a form of social performance, a process through which translators engage publics and negotiate authority across digital and cultural spaces. And in the translator visibility, uh, edited by Larissa Cercel and Alice Lial, they focus on framing visibility as a form, as reframed in dynamic and relational spaces, constantly shifting between the textual and the performative. This is the framework I draw on when thinking about Dazai's translator, who each navigate visibility in distinct ways, some performing it within the text, other performing it in public spaces through their public personas. And when it comes to the word translation itself, while I don't talk about it here, and it's not related exactly to this, but more to my own PhD project, I see translation as a process where translators serve as co-performers, working to restage the performance inherent in the original text. They achieve this both through their language choices and their visibility, whether that visibility is present within the text or reflected in the surrounding paratextual elements. And then the next part, we will be talking about how these performances operate in English, how translators frame Dazai's voice, tone, and even reputation through their different modes of visibility. So in English, we do have two constructed mode of translator visibility. On one hand, we have an example of Rolf McCarthy, who has been translating Dazai since 1980s, and he embodies a textual visibility. On the other hand, we have Sam Bett, a much newer but increasingly prominent translator, represents performative visibility. These two translators illustrate how visibility can operate both within and beyond the text. And the reason why I mentioned those two here is because both of them recently have been publishing with the same publisher, which is New Direction. To explain further, let's just look on Rolf McCarthy's visibility. Rolf McCarthy is the most prolific translator of Dazai's works to date. He maintains almost no public presence, no interviews or events, so he's basically publicly invisible. But he has a very authoritative way of approaching the text, and the way he does this is through his introductions. His introductions make him powerfully visible. For example, in Self-Portraits, which is the second translation collection he published of Dazai's works, he says that, I can't see very well here, so I'll just read from here. He says that though he employed an astounding variety of techniques, styles, and voices throughout his career, a good 1/3 of his fairly prodigious output took the form of what might be called, for lack of a better term, autobiographical fiction, first-person stories fashioned out of the raw material of his life. The purpose of this collection is to simply present some of the best of these works as roughly chronological series of self-portraits with all the artistic leeways that implies. So interestingly enough, up until that point, not many people have been mentioning, no one actually mentioned Dazai's works or writing style to be not autobiographical, but autobiographical fiction or autofiction. For the most part, a lot of people were seeing Dazai's writing as autobiographical. So through this introduction, McCarthy effectively frames Dazai's literature for his readers, directing how they approach the text and asserting his visibility through paratextual authority, even while remaining publicly silent or absent. Next up, we have Sambit, translator of Flowers of Buffoonery, The Beggar Student, and he does actually have a new translator coming up. I don't think there's any information about it yet, but it's called Phoenix. And he takes a completely different approach compared to McCarthy. He provides no introduction within the text, but is highly visible through media and performance. So Bett is actively promoting his translation online and in interviews. And rather than reinforcing the familiar image of Dazai as dark or nihilist, Bett shifts the focus toward comedic and playful dimension of Dazai's works, what he describes as cartoonish or even Looney Tunes-like. I'm not sure about the Looney Tunes part, but I understand focusing on the buffoonery, which is something that you can see in Japanese scholarship, but you don't see that in American or Anglophone scholarship. Bett even performs this interpretation visually. He created an alter ego named Buff One, appearing in pink attire inspired by the book's cover and promoting his translation on social media using hashtags such as Dazai Osamu and Dazai Osamu's cosplay. If you're familiar with not No Longer Human, Flowers Buffoonery, anybody here have read Doke no Hana? So Doke no Hana is about this pretty much Obayozo from the same No Longer Human, but Obayozo in this novella, after he tries committing double suicide with his lover, who ends up dying and passing away, he goes to a hospital and he spends 4 days there with his friends. And throughout the 4 days, and his friends coming to visit him, nobody, not even him, addressed what is happening, which is the double suicide and him trying to commit double suicide with his lover. And they tried to avoid that situation by basically clowning around. So this performative visibility turns translation into a kind of a culture event, extending Dazai's presence into digital and popular spaces even more. By the way, Sam Bett's Flowers Buffoonery now ranks among the top 100 Japanese literature titles on Amazon US. I checked here on the Ireland one, they don't have it. But it does shows how translator visibility can directly influence reception and sales, because in that list, there has always been just 2 of Dazai's works, which is He's No Longer Human and The Setting Sun. And this was the third or first after those 2 to appear ever in that list. So just to summarize this part, or Dazai's translation in English, only 3 major monographs exist in English about Dazai. That is O'Brien's and Land's and Wolf, which was published in 1990. Since then, critical writing has been limited to scattered essays or articles, but the translations themselves have taken over the interpretive role. McCarthy's textual authority and Bett's performative visibility show 2 opposite ways of how a translator could restage Dazai for new readers. Now I'll move into the Arabic part. So Dazai was first translated into Arabic in 1971 when Shayo, The Setting Sun, appeared in Egypt under the title Ash-Shams al-Ghariba, followed by a Syrian edition a year later. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any of the covers for these 2 editions, so this is a different one. And also just to, for those who don't know, while there are many dialects of Arabic, literary translations are done in standard Arabic. So it doesn't really matter of like what nationality the translator is, it's always gonna be in standard Arabic. After these early attempts, Dazai disappeared from Arabic translation for almost 2 decades until 1997, when Mohamed Odaima translated Ningen Shikaku, No Longer Human, not from Japanese, but from Donald Keene's English version under the title Suqut Rajul, The Downfall of a Man. He told me that he translated the title from the French version, but it's not exactly the downfall of a man, it's the downfall of a male, just because in the French, homme could be a man and could also be a human being, which is interesting choice to make it into a man in Arabic as a male. But a major turning point came in 2013 with Walid Farouq's Al-Ab, the father, the first direct translation, the first Arabic direct translation from Japanese, which is of the short story Titi. This was followed by Safaa Nour's Lam Yaud Insanan, a direct translation of Ningen Shikaku. I can show you the second one. And this trend of direct translation was solidified with Maisara Afifi, the translator Maisara Afifi, who became Dazai's most prolific Arabic translator, releasing multiple direct translation between 2019, 2024, and 2024, including Shayo, this one, and multiple other translations. And he does have a forthcoming Dazai Osamu trilogy coming next year. So despite this progress, indirect translation have researched, often driven by Dazai's fame in pop culture. For instance, Asim Ali's 2024 edition of Ningen Shikaku and Shayo used Bungo Stray Dogs inspired covers to target anime fans rather than literary audience. And if you can see here, this is actually Shayo, but if you can see in the background in Japanese, it says Ningen Shikaku. And that's because the power of Dazai Osamu, like the character, they do have superpowers, and his superpower is Ningen Shikaku, so they just put it there. They probably don't know. And this is another translation that uses Bungo Stray Dogs. But here it says Joshikose, which is, again, it's because it's a translation from the English. So schoolgirl is going to be Joshikose, but it's really actually Joseto. Despite this progress, as I said, indirect translation continues. In this, though, we see a curious pattern. Indirect translations often include prefaces. Translator preface is what I'm talking about, while direct translations, the one actually translated from Japanese, almost never do. Odaima's 1997 version of No Longer Human, translated from English, opens with a preface that itself is a translation of Rolf McCarthy's self-portraits introduction, which has nothing to do with the introduction that I just read you, has nothing to do with No Longer Human, but he uses it as an introduction for No Longer Human, the Arabic one. By contrast, translators such as Maisara Afifi or Safaa Nour provide no introduction, leaving readers with no paratextual context at all. This means that in Arabic, translator visibility is inverted, indirect, and translators appear visible through borrowed. Indirect translators appear through visible, Indirect translators appear visible through borrowed paratext, while direct translators remain silent and unacknowledged. So adding to this instability, some recent publishers, such as Bibliomania Publishing, have released they do have a lot of translations, and all of their translations is an indirect translation from anything that was published by New Directions. As you can see, all of the New Directions publications, they have that republished. And I'll just skip. By the way, this publishing company, the CEO is the same person as the editor, is the same person as the translator. And they are very famous in Egypt to the point that even Japan Foundation in Cairo, they have their translations in their libraries. And I found this yesterday and I had to share it. This was published 5 days ago. I want you to see how AI generated this is. If you can see the leg, it's like literally meshed with whatever this creature is. It's supposed to be, so this is Otogizoshi, and this is supposed to be Urashima Taro, and this is supposed to be a turtle, but that's not a turtle at all. And this is very sad. It's bad and sad. So unfortunately, there is a possibility that there's also AI translation here in this previous, in the translations by Bibliomania, because they produce translations very fast, like in like literally 2 months or less than that. And it's all one-man show, one person translating everything. I don't want to go over time. So just in conclusion, across these two spheres, translator visibility operates very differently. In English, Dazai's image is curated through performative translator visibility, introductions, media presence, and editorial framing that guide how readers interpret his work, while in Arabic, his image remains fragmented and unstable, marked by indirect translations, lack of transparency, and absence of performative visibility among direct translators. So framing Dazai is a material process, the result of editorial and translational choices that shape how his works are encountered across languages. Translation functions as a performative act, continually renewing Dazai's presence and reshaping his voice within the world literature. Through these acts of visibility and mediation, he emerges not as a fixed post-war author, but as a transcultural figure whose afterlife unfolds through each new translation and publication. And that's it for my talk. Thank you so much. Thank you.